What's that? Some sort of weird rock.
Girls, that's not any kind of weird rock. Look at how rounded it is. Feel that. Why do you think it's rounded?
I don't know. Can you tell it to us?
Can you handle a long story?
Yes.
It's a long and fascinating story. You see that big pile of rock above the water?
Yeah.
That cliff? The story is based on that cliff, and that's an ancient story. 10,000 years ago, right where we're sitting, there was ice going up 2 kilometers high in the air. A glacier. Things got warmer. Suddenly the ice melted and the ice rushed way out of here. And the Credit River was formed. And all that rock was sort of washed out when the glacier melted. And it went down and rounded all kinds of rocks, like turned them into marbles. Water brings life. And life meant that salmon and all kinds of fish came up the Credit River, established a new kind of life form. The banks of the river had all kinds of animals on them. Mastodons, those giant ancient elephant-like things, and giant beavers 7 feet long. Now they're both gone, but there's all kinds of other life on the river. There's deer on the Credit River, there are foxes, there are coyotes, there's raccoons. It's alive, it's a living place. And guess who came next?
Us?
You and you, right. Establishing the city of Mississauga. Mississauga is a big city right now, but it's also a wonderful natural paradise, and we're sitting in the middle of it in the Credit River.
Today, the landscape of our modern city looks much different than it did 10,000 years ago. The large mammals and the glaciers disappeared long ago, but the river is still a vital artery, a natural resource, and a place of beauty where the past and present converge.
There are almost 500 parks and woodlands in the city of Mississauga and 250 kilometers of trails. The Column Trail travels along the Credit River, and you can see glacial deposits 12,000 years old. You can look for fossils in limestone cobbles that are several 100 million years old. There are over 2 million trees in the city of Mississauga, including black willow, black walnut, white pine, and sugar maples. You can even scan the QR code with your phone and learn more about this particular beautiful tree. Some of the wildlife that you can see in the city of Mississauga includes great blue herons, salamanders, painted turtles, beavers, red foxes, and lots of white-tailed deer. At the Riverwood Conservancy, we have an unusual fragment of the northern part of the Carolinian forest ecosystem. And at Rattray Marsh Conservation Area, you can walk on the boardwalks and experience one of the last coastal wetlands and shingle beaches of Lake Ontario. So it's easy to get outdoors and experience our natural heritage.
Just like people did hundreds of years ago.
How did people first get here? How did we get here?
Many historians believe that the first humans came to North America over 10,000 years ago, crossing over the Bering Land Bridge following the migrating routes of animals. They gradually moved and settled through North America, and several distinct Aboriginal peoples came to live in what is now southern Ontario. Archaeologists have found remnants of many early native peoples in Mississauga, particularly in proximity to the Credit River and other creeks. Most of these early First Nations people were hunters and gatherers who lived lightly on the land and did not leave a great deal of evidence behind to remind us of their historical presence. Non-native settlers began to interact with and influence traditional Aboriginal practices, largely through the fur trade. One such early native group was the Mississaugas, who had come to settle along the banks of the Credit River and in the Credit River Valley. To the Mississaugas, the Credit River was the Missinihi, or the Trusting Creek, a reference to the early fur trading commerce that was based on credit or trust.
Oh, if only that rock could share its stories. What stories it would tell. À la claire fontaine, en allant m'y promener, j'ai trouvé l'eau si belle que je me suis baigné. Il y a longtemps que je t'aime, jamais je ne t'oublierai. The songs. Memories. The river is life. The water sustains all life the way we understand it. Not only the fish that live in the water, but also on its shores, the plants, the trees, the birds, the animals, and the people that live along its shores as we travel this great Credit River. Our First Nations people lived here thousands of years ago. And around the 1720s, when the first Europeans came, the French fur traders set up a trading post at the mouth of the Mississauga River, the Credit River. Bang, that was Jean-Baptiste Rousseau. Those rivers provided the waterways for the fur traders to come in. Furs were exchanged for things like copper kettles, blankets, iron tools, all sorts of things. And they had good credit. They had good credit. At that trading post, many came. And if we listen closely to the song of the river, c'est l'aviron qui nous mène, c'est l'aviron qui nous mène en haut, c'est l'aviron qui nous mène, c'est l'aviron qui nous mène en haut. The river tells us the story. It tells us the story of our ancestors that were here.
By the 1790s, the British Crown recognized that the Mississaugas controlled a large amount of land at the western end of Lake Ontario, and on early maps this area became known as the Mississauga Tract. The Crown entered into a series of negotiations with the Mississaugas to acquire this tract for settlement. At the end of July of 1805, representatives of the British Crown convened a meeting with the principal chiefs of the Mississaugas at the mouth of the Credit River. The Crown was represented by Colonel William Klaus, Deputy Superintendent of Indian Affairs, and other officials and officers of the 49th Regiment of Foot. The Mississaugas were represented by their principal chiefs and a gathering of warriors. The conference was held outside and lasted for several days. The chiefs of the Mississaugas understood that the Crown wished to purchase land from them, and while they were wary of relinquishing too much of their territory, they also looked to protect their interests in regards to oncoming settlers. Eventually, the Mississaugas ceded to the Crown's request for territory. The Crown and the Mississaugas signed Treaty 13A on August 2nd of 1805. Often referred to as the Mississauga Purchase, this treaty gave control of over 70,000 acres of land to the Crown, involving all lands from the Etobicoke Creek to Burlington Bay to an approximate depth of 6 miles from the waterfront. The southern part of the city of Mississauga, from Lake Ontario to Eglinton Avenue, is located within this area. The Mississaugas reserve rights to the fishery of the Credit River, along with 1 mile on each side of the river. This area became known as the Credit Indian Reserve. In August of 1818, the Crown and the Mississaugas signed Treaty 19, which ceded 648,000 acres of land, all lands north of modern Eglinton Avenue. And in February of 1820, Treaties 22 and 23 were signed, and the Crown acquired the reserve lands which had been set aside in 1805.
Can you hear the water? Can you feel the land? Can you smell that air? Could you imagine 200 years ago what my people, the Mississaugas, the New Credit First Nation, felt when they were here? As I stand here today and feel the relationship with the water, with the land, and with my territory, I can feel my ancestors walking about and feeling grateful. 200 years ago, we would have canoes and my people walking along the edge of the waters, fishing, playing, but mostly collecting, because that's what my people did. We respect our mother, the earth. We use everything and anything that we collect, so we walk very softly on her. We give that respect that we need. We would teach respect. We would teach all the 7 grandfathers. Teach the songs, the drumming, the dancing, the regalia. We will do all of those things. And I think that when people come back, my people come back, we get that connection. That's why I love being here in Mississauga. We're not gone. We're very much here. And my people are very much here. I give my thanks to Mother Earth, to Creator, Chimigwech.
The Credit Indian Reserve lands along the Credit River were retained by the Crown until March of 1847, when they were put up for public auction. The Credit Mission, also known as the Credit Indian Village, was located on the site of what is now the Mississauga Golf and Country Club. The Credit Mission was part of the government's plan to assimilate and settle Native peoples in one area and to allow for settlement on their surrounding lands. The mission was built in 1826 under the direction of Reverend Peter Jones and Colonel James Givens, the Superintendent of Indian Affairs. The village was located on the high grounds overlooking the Credit River, while the valley lands along the river were cultivated for farming. An early description of the village describes an elevated plateau cleared for farming, with 3 rows of detached cottages among fields surrounded with rail fences. By 1837, the village grew to include some 52 family dwellings, and an estimated 500 acres were cleared for farming. The Credit Mission thrived for more than a decade, but pressure from surrounding settlement, the loss of title to their traditional lands, and a decline in population led the Mississaugas to relocate to the new Credit Reserve in 1847. The Credit Mission village itself eventually vanished.
Looking around the city of Mississauga today, it is hard to envision the historic landscape that was once home to the native Mississaugas and which greeted the first European settlers who arrived in the area. Vast forests, non-existent roads, and a few scattered paths. In a few short years, early surveyors were followed by settlers, and gradually the landscape was forever altered. Vast stands of trees were removed, fields were cleared, farms and businesses established, fences and houses built, and roads constructed. Over time, these roads were improved, and new roads and bridges were built, and the railways arrived, all of which altered the natural landscape and the way in which people lived on the land.
Historically, the city of Mississauga, formerly Toronto Township, was subject to cadastral surveys in 1806, 1819, and 1821 respectively. This divided the land into a grid system, and decisions were made during these early surveys that provided the fabric upon which all subsequent land subdivisions were made. Settlement began sporadically following each of these early surveys. Most of the old survey, south of Eglinton Avenue, was divided into 200-acre lots and was granted to settlers beginning in 1806. By the outbreak of the War of 1812, most lots had been granted. The Crown and clergy each retained 1 lot in 7. Many, but not all, of the earliest settlers were loyalists, who were eligible to petition the government to receive land. In order to attain Crown patent, or title, settlers would have to complete settlement duties, usually within 3 to 5 years of initial settlement. In a relatively short period of time, the landscape changed dramatically to one of cleared roads, fields, farms, and fences.
My family first got here in 1811. The first thing we had to do was survey our property. Samuel Wilmot had done a 200-acre survey in 1806. My family arrived here about 5 years later, so I had to do a bit of a survey of my own. With some friends, we got some chain, and I was able to figure out where on the property I was going to place my log cabin. I had to build a cabin that was 16 feet by 24 feet, required in order to get my land grant, and to clear some land for a 5-acre property. That farm was needed just to feed my family, and over time expanding that farm.
Over time, many small settlements became established, mainly growing around a significant early intersection and places of commerce, service, or gathering. The first of these settlements we refer to today as Marigold's Point, which in time evolved into the historic village of Clarkson. Some communities blossomed, while others disappeared entirely and became what we call the Lost Villages. The Lost Villages had imaginative names from our past, some of which continue on today in road names and park names, such as Burnhamthorpe, Derry West, and Sheridan, while others have vanished almost entirely, such as the Catholic Swamp, Barberton, and Somerville, amongst many others.
Each historic community in the city of Mississauga has its own unique story of growth, change, in some cases prosperity, and decline. Early hamlets and villages serviced the needs of the surrounding farms and were rooted in settlement lifestyles and activities. The coming of the railways and improvements in roads and transportation brought change to many of these smaller communities by exposing them to competition from larger centers of industry and population. These influences meant that, although they reached their peak between 1850 and 1900, many of these small communities lost their importance, and by the early 1900s, they had declined and gradually faded into obscurity. But there are examples of our historic roots throughout our modern city. These include historic houses, road and place names, cemeteries, cenotaphs, and industrial ruins, amongst many other remnants of our past. These provide a sense of time, place, and meaning within the modern city that has grown up around and upon the places that came before our city.
Unlike the Lost Villages, there are historic villages within our city that grew and thrived over time and continue to be significant components within our modern city. Clarkson, Cooksville, Dixie, Arundel, Lakeview, Malton, Meadowville Village, Port Credit, and Streetsville. Born through amalgamation over time, the city of Mississauga is a city comprised of many historic villages. Our founding villages are still recognized as place names within our city, and they are listed on the ceiling of the council chambers at the Civic Center. By the 20th century, farming gave way to a new era of industrialization that enabled Mississauga to become the bustling city that it is today. But that is a whole nother story.
Well, kids, you've just had an amazing history of the city of Mississauga.
I didn't realize how special Mississauga is and how lucky I am to live here.